Grab your pencils and your books, but feel free to leave the mask at home as the 2022-2023 school year kicks off on Staten Island with limited coronavirus protocols, multiple new schools, and a new curriculum in the works. Welcome to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene, a podcast bringing you an inside look at the biggest stories on Staten Island with the reporters who cover them. I'm your host, Erik Bascome, and this week I'm joined by Staten Island Advance education reporter Annalise Knudson to discuss the Advance's back-to-school coverage and what students and parents can expect during the upcoming school year. Thanks for joining me today, Annalise. I hope you enjoyed your summer since things tend to really pick up for you once the new school year starts.
Yeah, I did enjoy my summer until, the few weeks of back-to-school coverage lead up, which is always stressful.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're going to get into that. But, as the education reporter, I think some people probably assume that the summer is kind of that slow, relaxing time for you, but as we both know, that's never really the case here. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about some of the other types of education stories that you tend to focus on during the summer, even though traditional school isn't in session?
This summer, in particular, I focused a lot on the Summer Rising program. I actually visited a school during that time because Summer Rising is such a new program that was introduced during COVID and has kind of taken on its own role as not really summer school in the traditional sense that we think about, where kids have to go because they weren't doing well during the school year, but more in, inviting those opportunities for experiences like field trips, enrichment activities, just getting kids ready for the new school year. So I know that was a big focus during the school year. But also, school's not in session, so there's really not a lot of news going on. So I did try to focus on finding those interesting kids in the neighborhood or the community and writing stories about them and what they do during their free time during the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those feature-y stories are really cool. I know we had talked a little bit about the one in particular of our young golf prodigy we have here on Staten Island, right? Has that one run? Have we put that out yet? Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
I wrote a story about this young kid who was, I think, 4 or 5 at the time, right before COVID happened, so like February 2020. And one of his videos of him hitting a golf ball went viral, and we did a story. It was a Sunday story. It was, it was just a cute story talking to the parent, and the dad reached out to me again and said, hey, you did this story on us a few years ago. He's going to be in this world championship.
Wow.
In the first week of August in North Carolina, and the whole family was traveling down there. His golfing instructor was traveling with them, and he was going to be competing against kids in his age range in golf. Like, that's how good he was, because you have to qualify, you have to obviously play a few games, you have to win some of those, regional competitions.
Yeah, like a regional tournament.
Like the local tournaments, and he made it. And he was incredible watching him, and he was just so humble. He just loves the game. And he doesn't get nervous. The dad said, I get more nervous than he does.
Yeah, that's the case a lot of times.
He's 7, so this is just fun for him. And I think it's just was a really cool opportunity to meet him and see him playing the game and just really loving something at such a young age.
And I think it's so cool that we're able to kind of highlight the youth of Staten Island, right? Not always in school, but also in their extracurriculars and things like this. So I just thought that was a really cool story that I wanted to touch on real quick. But let's talk about leading up to the start of the new school year. You mentioned it already, but typically in August, we get tasked with all of this kind of lead-up coverage, as we said, of what parents should expect, what students will see, what new schools are there. So I'm just curious, kind of, how do you decide which types of topics to focus in on each year as we're kind of getting back, and why do you think that kind of coverage is so important?
This is not something that I just handle myself. I have a lot of help from the editors, and we have a lot of meetings leading up to preparing for back to school, and a lot of it has to do with looking at what we've done in the past. So this year was a bit different because we're not really going into a school year with those COVID restrictions like we have the last 2 years.
Right.
So kind of like a blend of looking back to like 2019 that I had to go back and say, what did we do before
when the world was normal, yeah.
Yeah, right before coronavirus hit, because everything changed. Back to school, preparing for that coverage was so different the last 2 years. So just a blend of, are there going to be coronavirus restrictions and taking that angle, but also what have we done that is like the traditional normal school year of, the new schools that are coming, or what parents can expect, like you said, or what students can expect. And just getting that, that back to school, like, we're excited, send us your photos, things like that.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, this really is kind of a team effort. This is something that obviously you are the lead on often because you are our education reporter, but we have editors, we have other reporters. I tend to help out with this as well because we're on the same community news team. We pull in a photographer too, typically. So it really is kind of a group effort to get all this done. And so I want to talk about now kind of the first day of school, which, as we know, is always a big deal for us at the Advance. It's been something that we've been covering, I know, for probably about 5 years now, right? So can you tell our listeners kind of typically how we cover the first day of school and what that looks like for you?
What I do is usually making a list of schools, and it depends, obviously. The first day, we had a different first day for Catholic schools, so that had its own separate list. And then we had a list for public schools, and we try to get like a wide range across the borough. Mm-hmm. So we'll pick like maybe one North Shore school, one South Shore school. This year we had a new school building that opened, which is over in Stapleton on Targhee and Waverly, in that area. Mm-hmm. There's actually 2 schools in there, and then a District 75 site. That's where I went, that's where I ended up, and we figured that would be the best spot because it is a new school. Mm-hmm. Seeing the environment, seeing the new school building, seeing the staff that's having their first year as well. And I know when we were discussing you going out for the first day, since you're the transportation reporter, you're going out to see, you went out to Hungerford, the new building
on Petrides,
to see the traffic there. So, looking and examining what has changed within the last few years. If there's a new school building, we'll tend to go there. For Catholic schools, we reached out to the Archdiocese. They gave us a recommendation, and then we kind of said, where can we spread out so we have multiple people in multiple places to get the good variety of the photos that we like to see from the first day.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you noted, I am often, as the transportation reporter, tasked with doing the back-to-school traffic thing, which, as everyone knows, traffic is bad enough on Staten Island as it is. But once the school year starts and you've got all the teachers going to school, you've got all the school buses with the students all over the streets, you have so many more just vehicles on the road than you might have during the summer months that it gets a little crazy. The Petrides thing has been an issue for years that we've been reporting on, really since they started construction on that new school building, because it limited the amount of parking spaces in the lot, and there's more vehicles going to that complex. There's really only one entrance where all these cars are kind of fighting to get in and out. So I think the first day of school stuff, it really is a team effort between sometimes you visiting new schools. We have photographers at schools in different parts of the borough. We have me in a place where there might be more traffic, or we might in the past we've done some Facebook Lives when we were leaning on a little more heavily on those. So it really depends on what's going on, but it is always, a big thing for us, and I think that the people tend to enjoy it. We also have people send in some photos. We ask them first day of school photos, add that, have your kid featured in the paper, which is something a lot of people enjoy as well. So, but let's move on now that we've covered some of the first day stuff. I want to talk a little bit about what the students and parents should be aware of for this coming year. So one thing that I think a lot of people are curious about is, what's left of the city's school coronavirus protocols, because most of them are gone. You don't need to wear the masks anymore, but there are still some other things in place. So can you walk us through some of that and kind of the concerns that we've been hearing from people in the community regarding these last few protocols?
The city has basically removed most of the COVID school protocols, and I think the only thing that's kind of remaining is the fact that they're still getting those at-home rapid tests. So if they've been exposed to someone, or if they're experiencing symptoms, they would follow the same protocol that they put in place last year. You have 2 tests, you take them depending on whether you have symptoms or exposed. You would take both of them within a certain time frame. And we're just continuing life as the new normal at this point. The other aspect of the COVID protocols is that there's still a vaccine mandate in place. And when I say that, I don't mean kids are required to get a vaccine to go to school, but they're required to get one to participate in those high-risk extracurriculars. So they said, like chorus or band, because of, the instruments or the trumpets, things like that. And then the sports, PSAL sports, which I know is still really a hot topic for a lot of people because, you know, these kids haven't been in a regular school environment for the last couple of years. Maybe last year was the most normal at that point. But, you know, a lot of kids really rely on extracurriculars and rely on sports, and that's a big part of their school experience. So I know a lot of people are still upset about that. The vaccine mandate's still in place for visitors as well.
That was one I was going to touch on as well.
That includes the
too.
Parents.
Yeah. I had just actually spoken to someone who was talking about the fact that, you know, because of the vaccine mandate, they're not able to, you know, go into the building for a parent-teacher conference or something like that. They're saying, you know, oh, we can schedule something over Zoom, but like for certain parents in certain situations, not being able to even enter your child's school building, I know is a cause for concern for sure.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of, you know, you think about if your kid is in, you know, a special event at school and you can't go to it because you're not vaccinated.
Yeah, they're in like the Christmas show or the spring play or something like that.
Oh. Because that might be.
Oh, well, that's true. Maybe then if the
so,
student doesn't have it,
right.
Well, maybe there's cases where the students are vaccinated, but then the parents aren't. Maybe the students get, like, the parents allow the students to get vaccinated to participate in those sorts of things, but they still don't feel like they need it necessarily. So, yeah, it's made things very messy for the student-parent events. We'll be right back. The Mayor of Maple Avenue is a powerful multi-part podcast about Sean Sinisi, a victim of former Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky, who was arrested 10 years ago for numerous child sexual abuse charges. The podcast series is written and hosted by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Sarah Ganim, who takes listeners into the world of addiction rehabilitation, where society can be quick to celebrate the consequences for abusers while not addressing the needs of their victims. Subscribe now to The Mayor of Maple Avenue wherever you get your podcasts. Let's move on. Another big thing this year is that the new universal mosaic curriculum that the city has been working on. So what can you tell us kind of about this curriculum, how it differs from the one that public schools have used in recent years, and what kind of reaction it's been getting so far?
So this is something that the city is still working towards and hasn't really put in place yet. It's supposed to be coming in 2023. Again, that was under the previous administration that announced that. So we haven't really gotten an update as to when that would be put in place anymore. I'm assuming they're still working towards it because they've made steps towards it. A big part of that is the literacy aspect, which they put in place for, you know, first and second graders to do those literacy screeners to see if they have a learning disability, for example, like dyslexia, and then working towards that. And a big part of the curriculum is also having the voices of the community. We kind of talked about this before, but thinking about the history of the boroughs or of New York City in general, really honing in on the local history here.
Right.
So, you know, obviously there's curriculum that is very broad and, you know, it can be for any school in the country, but I know that there's something here that they really want to hone in on the local aspect. And we've been really trying to push the city to say, are you going to include the Sandy Ground history?
Yeah,
you know, that's
absolutely.
something really important here on the borough, and something that would be really good for field trips for students. And we haven't heard anything yet on that aspect, but I know it's, you know, we put it out there, so it's really on the city to say, okay, yeah, we want to make this, you know, really a part of the curriculum. Because what they've told us in the past is, yeah, it's part of it, like it's touched on, they learn about it, but, you know, especially here on Staten Island, you know, it's such a big part of our history here.
It feels like something that could easily be a focal point, especially, as you say, with the universal mosaic curriculum kind of striving to incorporate communities that may have been underrepresented in the past. So you talk about the African American community on Staten Island and the historical significance of Sandy Ground. It just seems like a no-brainer, really. So hopefully we'll get some more news on that soon. But let's move on to another thing I wanted to touch on, which I feel like every time I hear something about it, there's some controversy, there's some people complaining about the way that the city is running it or not running it or whatever it is. And so that's the Gifted and Talented program. So first, can you just give us some general information about the program and how it works, and then talk about some of the changes that have been made this year and how that could impact Staten Islanders?
Yeah, the Gifted and Talented was actually expanded this year. That was the announcement this year. And that's kind of going completely the opposite direction of former Mayor Bill de Blasio,
right,
who wanted to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or he said, oh, every student has the right to, that quality, high-level education. We want to make sure every kid has that, so we're going to get rid of it or phase it out.
Mm-hmm.
And what a part of the expansion as well was completely removing the entry-level test. So every kid that was going into kindergarten was expected to take this timed exam. Like, imagine a little 4-year-old.
That feels stressful, yeah.
5-year-old taking this exam to see if they're smart enough to get into this gifted and talented.
Yeah, a little bit of undue pressure there.
Right. So what they've changed is if the student goes to a DOE pre-K program, they can get recommended by their teacher and kind of they go that route. And if your child is not in the DOE program, you can have it recommended. You can have someone from the DOE would come and visit your child while they were in the program or do interviews, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of base the decision. And then it goes into like a lottery-based program.
Yeah, that's interesting because although I do kind of agree with you in that, like, testing these 4-year-olds to see if they can get into this gifted and talented program feels a little weird, right? But then at the same time, the new system almost feels a bit subjective and arbitrary. So it's not really, some people would say, well, the test score is the test score. If this is what they got and they're smarter than everyone else, then they should be the one that gets in. But then, as we say, that's a lot of pressure to be putting on these kids and telling them you're not smart enough when they're 4 years old for this program.
And not everyone tests well.
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's never going to be perfect, but it does sound like at least we're kind of taking some of the stress.
It was expanded, so there are more seats.
Yeah.
And the way that I understood it was it would continue to be expanded every year. Mm-hmm. Obviously, as the kids get into more grades, more kids would enter into the program.
Right.
So I think the whole point was we're going to expand the qualification, but also expand the amount of programs and seats that we're offering.
Moving on to, a bit of a more somber topic here. So discussions about improving school safety have been kind of front and center these past few months, ever since the tragic shooting that we saw in Texas in May. And so what are some of the things that the city is doing and things that they're considering to try and better protect our students?
Every single time there's something that happens in a school, the entire country starts to ask that question. How can we improve school safety, make sure our kids and our staff are safe? And it's something that I feel that this administration is looking at a little more closely than we've seen in the past. After the awful shooting in Texas, Mayor Eric Adams said, well, we're going to look at all these different measures we can take, looking at buzzer entry systems. They're starting a pilot program with that because right now every single door to a school is locked except for the front door, and it would require someone to get up and lock it and unlock it if they didn't have this new system in place.
Right.
Which is a lot because then you're not really focused on who's really coming in because you're just constantly getting up. Mm-hmm. But I know what the city has just announced when the new school year started is that they're taking steps, not necessarily in a buzzer entry system way, but saying we're going to provide like the notifications if there's an emergency at the school so parents have an idea of what's going on. A lot of the times in the past, and we've had instances on the borough where there's been a lockdown.
Like the Wagner High School thing a few years ago, right?
And where then parents weren't getting the information.
Yeah, and then they're gathering outside the school. They're trying to call their kids. You've got former Councilman Matteo kind of acting as like a liaison, going back and forth in the school. Yeah, it was really chaotic. So
I know that they're definitely, that's a step forward because it allows the principals to provide timely information to parents because obviously you're going to panic if something's happening at your kid's school. So I think that will help a little bit. We talked about the prototype that would allow them to lock or unlock the school doors. They're adding more school safety agents who are staying with the NYPD because, again, under the previous administrations, there was talks of transitioning them to the DOE. That has since been taken back. They're staying with the NYPD. They're adding more. So I think this is just all kind of a conscious effort to make strides towards improving safety. But what we hear a lot of the time is especially with weapons in schools and with, the scanners and finding those things, a lot of kids bring weapons because they're scared of something happening.
Right.
And that doesn't even necessarily mean in the school building, but, the traveling to school or traveling home from school. Mm-hmm. So there's it's such a complex puzzle of trying to figure out how can we improve school safety, how can we keep kids safe, how can we make sure that kids don't feel the need to bring weapons to school, like how do we keep the travel to school safe. Like there's just so many pieces of it that it's hard to say one thing will help because we don't know. We don't know.
No, exactly. But at least, as you said earlier, it does feel like the city is making more of a conscious effort now to really kind of lock in on this and figure out ways to improve it. So let's switch back to some happier news. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but Staten Island saw multiple new schools open their doors for the first time last week. And so can you briefly walk us through like a couple of the new schools? I know some of them are a little different, themed schools. I know I visited one where the chancellor was visiting last week, but can you tell us a little about those?
Yeah, so there's a new school at the Evelyn King campus in Stapleton, which is where you were.
Right.
There's two schools in there. It's the Waverly Academy for Empowered Learners, and then the Young Women's Leadership School. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure you wrote a story about the Young Women's Leadership School too, which is funny.
Yeah, I actually didn't even realize when I was going there to do the chancellor's visit. Typically, if I'm going to an assignment for education, I'm like, oh, let me see what Annalise has written on this, so at least I have like a background knowledge. I looked up the article and then I'm reading it and I was like, oh, this sounds familiar. And I went to the byline and I was like, oh, I wrote this article. So yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of have a bit of more intel on the school than I did. Like, I went there for the first day, but you went inside recently.
Right, yeah, and it was beautiful. I mean, one, the school building was amazing in, like, tip-top shape. The new library, new computer lab was, like, gorgeous. I wish we had those kinds of things when we were back in PS30 back in the day. Mm-hmm. But I was also just really impressed with the school staff and the students there, and even the chancellor and just kind of the effort that he's made on Staten Island. And also just, the school it's a single gender school. It's for female and female identifying students. It's similar to, if our listeners are aware of, Eagle Academy, which is for boys, but kind of the same concept here where it's single gender, but it is a public school. They're focused really not only on academics, but leadership and civic engagement and that type of stuff. And the visit was just really great. I really enjoyed my time speaking with the chancellor. He also used to be a principal at an Eagle Academy school in the Bronx, so he could kind of speak to the experience and the benefits of that kind of stuff. So it was really exciting. It was something that this is something the chancellor touched on. Just not every student wants the same type of school experience. Not everyone thrives in the same conditions. Some people want a big school where there's 3,000 students. Other people feel more comfortable when it's a small school and maybe there's a couple hundred and everybody knows each other and you're getting more one-on-one attention. Or maybe someone wants a themed school with a specific thing that they're interested in. So I think that the more types of offerings that we have here on Staten Island, the better. And I was really impressed with my time there.
Yeah, I'm really excited to eventually go visit there, mm-hmm. because that will happen eventually, where I go visit all of these new schools. So that also includes the new Hungerford school building.
Right.
I mean, Hungerford has existed on Tompkins for a very long time. And they finally got a new building at Patrides, where you were on the first day. So again, we're going to eventually visit there to see the brand new accessibility and the classrooms, and it's probably going to be incredible, if I can imagine.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, especially given that Hungerford is a school for students with special needs. The accessibility and the new technology in that building is probably something to marvel at as mm-hmm. well. So I'll be interested to see when you do get to go visit there. So before we go, I assume that the start of the new school year means you'll be ramping back up on your in-class column, right? And so can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your column and what types of stories you tend to focus on and how people can reach out if they have any suggestions?
Yeah, any opportunity to plug my column
exactly.
is my favorite thing. Every time I visit somewhere and I see someone, I'm saying, here's my card, email me things for my
right.
column, because sometimes we think about, we're such a localized newspaper and we sometimes don't have the people to go out to every single thing that a school holds. And I always encourage people to say, even if we can't come, just take some photos, send us some information from the day. If you want to send quotes or anything really that's going on in your school, and it gets put into this weekly column, which hopefully will start back up soon, kind of just rounding up things going on around the borough. And I always plug it because, you know, we are such a local newspaper, and a lot of places don't do what we're doing.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes it's just nice to hear what's going on in a school, even if we're not going out there to cover it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, as you said, we only have so many reporters, and there are so many schools on Staten Island. I don't know the exact number, but it's dozens
Over
and dozens.
77, maybe.
Wow,
we
yeah.
have new schools, so now I don't know what the new number
Yeah,
is.
we're you know, getting close to 75 to 100 schools, so we can't be at all of them, but they're all doing so much great work with their students. So to be able to feature those on our website and in our newspaper, I think is really great. And so if anyone does have any suggestions, anything going on in your students' classrooms, definitely reach out to Annalise on that. And, you know, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to having you back on again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene. If you like what you've heard, please make sure to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and visit silive.com for the latest on all these stories and more. Thank you for supporting local journalism.